Producers often have their opinions when programming drums, whether to use one-shots or loops. But today I want to show you that you can actually use both to create full, textured, and more engaging drum arrangements in your tracks. I'm going to use a house beat for this tutorial, but you can follow along in any genre of electronic dance music. Now this lesson is actually pulled from my 12-week coaching program, the Producer Launchpad. So normally you'd actually have to pay to get access to this, but today I want to show it to you for free right here on this YouTube channel. If you are feeling stuck with your progress as a music producer and you're wanting to get to a professional quality level in the shortest time possible, do sign up for the 12-week Producer Launchpad waiting list down below, and as soon as it's open for enrollment, you'll get notified. And with that, let's hop in. So in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about how in your drum programming, you can use both the power of one-shot drum samples and loop drum samples. Now, it goes without saying, if you haven't figured it out already, loops are okay to use in your drums, right? The only reason you may want to avoid using loops in some cases is because there's simply less flexibility with a loop as opposed to one shot. But also there are certain limitations to just using one shots as well. So we can use both of these types to get the best of both worlds, right? And that's what I want to be covering today. Now, there's kind of two ways of starting a drum programming session, drum programming loop, whatever you want to call it, right? You can either start with one shots or you can start with a loop. Now, there are benefits to doing either, and what I would recommend starting with would be very much dependent on the genre you're making, but also the importance of the sound of a loop. If you think of it like this, the first sounds you're dragging into your project, generally speaking, not always, are going to become the foundation of your drum programming. So I would encourage you, for example, if you're making a 130 BPM old breakbeat style track, perhaps bring in the breakbeat loop first and work from there. If you're making more modern kind of future house, where the drums are very punchy, clean sounding, I would encourage you to start with some great quality one shots and then perhaps work your way up from there. Generally speaking, what you're going to be doing if you start with a loop is emphasizing certain drum hits with one shots afterwards. So you're going to be starting with a loop and then you're going to be bringing in the one shots. Then from there, you build it out. And then the other way, so starting with one shots and then using loops, you're going to be constructing the skeletons of your drums with one shots and then using loops to kind of fill in the background, flesh it out, add texture to your drums. So those are kind of the two workflows you should have in mind when you're starting with either one of these. Now, if you're starting with loops, I would actually recommend try layering a bunch of different loops together. So I'm going to explain this by demonstrating it. So I'm going to search for a specific loop here. Bring in a nice drum loop at 120 BPM, which is my host tempo. And we're going to call this loop 1 even. Right? Zoom in, and this is what it sounds like. Now, we could just call it a day, right? Sounds good. The problem is, if you do this, there's a lot of other producers who are also going to be probably just dragging the same drum loop in. So I recommend layering in multiple loops just to flesh it out, because the sum of the parts are always going to be different to the individual layers you drag in. For example here, I'm going to bring in a different sample. I think it's from this organic house pack. I'm going to bring in a shaker loop. And notice how simply, I'm just going to cut off the end of this sample here. Notice how simply by doing that, we're bringing in, I'm going to turn off warping as well. And on this one too, we don't need it. This one, loop 2. Didn't have the space in there. And notice how these two layers, when they're layered up together, sound completely different to the individual components, right? Let's listen to this all together now. Right? It sounds so different to just the individual layers, right? And already we're getting something unique, but just by adding in additional loop layers, not even one shots yet, right? And so now I can go ahead and maybe even bring in a third one. So I've got another sample that I had in mind that I want to bring in. I think it's this one. Maybe it's this melodic deep house pack, right? Maybe it's this one. Yeah, this one's got a bit more of a groove to it. So I reckon we could make this one work. Let's bring it in and loop that up, right? I'm going to make sure we zoomed out. Sounds good. Let's bring this back now. Ooh. Right, so 3 drum loop layers, that is a drum arrangement done. Doesn't sound like this. Doesn't sound like this. And it doesn't sound like this. It sounds like this. Now, of course, there is a bit of flexibility you lose when you are working with just loops. So for example, one thing I could do is on this first loop, take a high pass filter and just take out the low end of the kick. And then I could go ahead and find my own kick drum, right? Maybe something like this. Bring it in on a new channel, and we're just gonna kind of replace the low end with our own customized low end. The other benefit of doing this is I could do a different kick pattern to what I'm doing up here, right? This one's just a simple 4 on the floor one, as we can see baked into the sample. But now I've got this kick, I can do whatever I want. Ooh. Right, I could even do something like add in a double kick here. Super cool. And then I could also do this by layering up the clap. Now there is a clap baked into this loop 3 sample here. But of course, it's not super duper like strong. So we might bring in a more traditional kind of 909 style clap, 808 style clap here, and put it on the 2 and 4. Right? See how that layers up nice and thick. I'm gonna bring on my limiter here, make sure we don't get any clipping. Awesome. Again, we can do some different stuff with the claps, right? We can add a different pattern. We could even go into the loop itself and duplicate out the clap component and start to layer that up, right? So the claps align. Anyway, that is how I would work with both loops and one-shots. Again, it's going to be a bit different if you started with, say, this kick and clap and then brought in these layers. These layers may be a bit quieter in the mix because they're more supporting the kick and clap, but you may end up with a similar result. It's just different workflows, right? So to recap, there's a benefit to working with both loops and one-shots because both have pros and cons and different levels of flexibility. If you're starting with a track that is a very loop-reliant track, it's good to use one-shots to emphasize certain hits. Or if you're starting with a track that's very oriented around one-shots, loops can help fill in the gaps, create texture, and flesh things out. Now, drum programming and getting your drums up to a professional level like this is just one of many things you need to focus on when producing music. So if you'd like me to help you working one-on-one with you to bring up your music to a quality that you're happy with, that you feel like you could send to labels or release on your own, in your chosen style, using your chosen DAW, I'd love to work with you. And if you'd like to work with me, sign up for my 12-week program, the Producer Launchpad. We're opening enrollment next week, and I would love to see you inside. Until then, happy producing.